everyone. This is update for November 10, 2022, day 260 of the war and of the date update. I'm gonna start with the strategic situation topics, and then we're gonna, check what's going on in Ukraine. So first of all, as always, we're gonna pay a lot of attention to China. So U.S. president is to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping on November 14. They're at, it says officially to discuss, Russian aggression, Taiwan, economic policies. But really, the purpose of the meeting is to have sort of last attempt to threaten out Chinese president out of plan of Taiwan invasion. So basically, there will be like sort of attempt to warn and kind of dissuade from impending invasion. Whether that's gonna succeed or not, nobody knows. We'll find out. Probably unlikely, but you never know, as they say. At the same time, U.S. president also, as a warning, to obviously it's directed towards Chinese president. He gave a warning that U.S. is not prepared to give concession to China on fundamental sort of questions. And obviously, what this really means that U.S. will, I wouldn't say defend, but will provide as weapons as necessary to Taiwan to protect its independence. So again, as you can see, the sort of both sides are firmly on the collision course, and this is sort of one final last call for sort of negotiations before things will start to heat up significantly. Related to this, US and Japan are doing a large military exercise. Obviously, everybody understands why. It's very clear. It's also kind of like deterrent to China to show that, okay, we have, Japan, US together, and, we prepare to stand against China. Then, also related to this, looks like it's unclear if Chinese president is going to attend G20 meeting. So it's kind of like up in the air. Probably that is dependent on the result of the meeting with the US president on the 14th of November. No, that's obviously speculative, but just it's not normal, right? Because China is essentially sort of one of the centers of power of G20. And then the Russian president confirmed that he's not going to attend this meeting. So again, it does look like, that meeting was sort of also another attempt for sort of reconciliation of differences without using military force. And it does look like it's falling apart essentially as well from that perspective. Another sort of dangerous data point, this time is coming from India, where the Indian Minister of Defense basically said that India does not agree with the current world order, right? So just just give you perspective of like to understand why it is important. All of this wars and everything that's happening is really about one thing: is preserving status quo or destroying the existing status quo in the world. The West is trying to preserve it and sort of modify it in some ways with the energy policy. In many ways, that actually makes situation in developing world worse. And so, as you can see, developing world is reacting with its response, saying, "Okay, it doesn't work for us. We're not going to support this world order," and that really puts India in a way in the same camp as Russia and China. India probably will not join alliance in a formal way because it has its own significant tensions with China. It's sort of they are kind of like a mortal enemies in a way. At the same time, they clearly indicating probably to China that they're going to be neutral, and that's all that China needs. It's not, they're not expecting India to start loving China and all of that stuff. As long as India is neutral, that's all that matters, right? So as you can see, China so far slowly but building kind of like this silent alliance of countries who just going to be silent, and they're not going to join, they're not going to go and say, oh well, we support West, and they will be just basically silent and watch and see who's going to be winning, and then they probably will at the very end of it they will join whoever is winning. So, and that's really what China really needs at this point. So I would say so far it looks that their diplomacy, I would say military preparation diplomacy, let's be more specific, um, looks successful. Maybe we'll find out that that doesn't, when things will be tested, that that's not very true. But so far, things are moving in the Chinese direction. Let's put it this way. Then another interesting news that's this time coming out of the U.S. It looks like U.S. I think the Department of Treasury extended permission to transact with Russian companies and banks for the purpose of energy import, which is very interesting because EU trying to ban starting December 5, and similar moves by the UK. So you can even see here there is no coherent stance or policy, and I do think that this is backwards policy to ban Russian energy from the world market. That's big contributor to extremely high inflation in Europe, right? Again, it's failed energy policies in Europe that's really driving inflation and slowly leading to social unrest. I think there is news that railroad workers in the UK probably gonna go on a strike because of because the wages don't keep up with inflation, and essentially you becoming poorer and poorer and poorer, and at some point people will become poor enough to protest. Let's put it this way, and that's just the first sign of what's coming. The situation actually in US in terms of inflation, I wouldn't say it's, well, I guess you could say it's getting better from a perspective. It doesn't grow, and it's the recent read was, I think, for October 7.7%. So it's definitely less than it used to be, which was, I think, previous one was like 8.5 or 8.3. So it's definitely moderating, but the real reason it's moderating is because it's we comparing to higher base, because inflation started last year as well. So you compare it to higher base, and it's kind of like optically looks as things slow down. So we'll see what happens. Maybe this is a sort of victory over inflation, maybe it is not. But I think if there is a conflict over Taiwan, it's going to be huge inflationary shock for the Western world. And US obviously will be one of the biggest victims, because US is importing a lot of goods from China, and those probably will go up in price. In terms of like internal situation in China, regular people are buying US dollars there. Chinese bank has like almost like trying to do this verbal intervention, saying like don't buy US dollar, it's bad for you, and things like that. But things are clearly getting worse. This is kind of like, well, I wouldn't say I mean, we can probably say that this is a run on the currency, right, from the insiders, because they see where everything goes. and they don't want to lose their savings. And typically, after the run on currencies, they could be run on banks, at which point situation really deteriorates in society. So again, things are going in the wrong direction economically in China, and that probably may force hand of the Chinese president to solve the sort of to direct all of that negative energy, to external war. So that's one of the biggest driver of this whole situation right now. Um, in many ways, it's very similar to World War II, where again there was uncontrollable consumption financed by debt around the world. Well, I guess at that point it was more like a Europe, US, and all of that. And then that model, fell apart because there was too much debt. Everybody was over levered, and then you have deteriorating economic conditions, which then put all of the countries on a path to world war. And in a way, there's a lot of parallels, as they say. Uh, you know, uh, History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, and it does look like it rhymes this time. In terms of like few pieces of information from Russia, which is in a way kind of interesting. So the sales of new apartments in Moscow fell in October by 36% relative to September, though. So that's, I don't know if it's how if it's seasonally affected or not. And then, but there was actually very sort of contradicting or interesting piece is there is a literally boom in consumer loans in Russia, which posted the largest number of loans that were sort of, I guess, given or issued to consumers at 1.3 million. So interesting information. It looks like either Russian citizens are feeling extremely great and hopeful about economic prospects, or they basically trying to convert their savings if they cannot, put them in the U.S. dollars or whatever other currency they want. Yeah. Then they try to basically buy, something so that they have, something of value down the road. So this one is kind of like interesting, very how'd say contradicting data point. Now let's move to Ukraine. Let's see what's going on there. In terms of energy infrastructure, is still hanging on. There's no collapse, no Russian attacks. So things stabilized at extremely dangerous low level. But nevertheless, the situation is stable. Now let's move to the walk through the battlefield, and we're going to start in a clockwise fashion as we always do. And the situation along the state border is actually pretty quiet. It's almost, I would say, unusually quiet. Now let's move to the North Luhansk front line. Things here are pretty much the same. Russian attacks, and then there are some reports of Ukrainian attacks. So basically, here in Kozemivka, there's also a report that Ukrainian troops try to, counterattack. So basically, it's pull push without much of the changes at this point. And Russian defenses are, I would say, I wouldn't say they strong, they perfect, but they strong enough not to allow Ukrainian troops to advance. Let's put it this way. Now let's look at the North Donbas front line. Things here are pretty much all the same. Wagner mercenaries continuing their non-stop attacks, sort of all super energetic. So far, no reports of advances for today. But as I said many times ago, it's this typical pattern. There's nothing happening for 5-10 days, and then they breach somewhere. So this is kind of like a normal situation on this front line. Now let's check Central Donbass front line. Things here are a little bit quieter. Like, mostly this Russian attacks out of this Pisky salient. That so far there is almost no advance there. Then attacks at Novomikhailivka, and the situation around Pavlivka is kind of like settling down, essentially, where the Russian troops looks like they control majority of the village. Let's say, I think Russian sources, they claim that they control 90%. Hard to verify, but let's say we can take it at the face value. Let's put this way. Something like that is probably true. Um, at the same time, as I said, this is going to be Pyrrhic victory, because holding to this Pavlivka in a long run is going to mean very high losses on a continuing basis for the Russian troops. So now let's check what's going on Zaporizhya front line. Things here are more or less quiet, as they always are, but with the changes on the Kherson bridgehead, things probably will change here as well. So actually, let's look what's going on Kherson bridgehead. And I have not really updated the map because it's sort of unclear where everything is. I would say this: what is clear is majority of the Russian troops apparently managed to get on the other side, on the eastern side of Dnipro River. Ukrainian troops are already essentially entering Kherson, and probably we'll see on the 11th, you'll see Ukrainian troops in Kherson. They're advancing, they're not quite yet here near Novokakhovka, they're advancing slowly. They're much faster in this area because, Kherson is kind of like symbolic versus here. It is actually more important here, but for propaganda purposes, Ukrainian authorities want to show Kherson, obviously. But the point is, looks like a majority of the Russian troops managed to escape. There are some rear guard units that looks like they might be stuck. It's unclear the number of those troops. Might be 1, 2, 3,000 at most. But we'll find out, I guess, on the 11th. What's going on there, because there's a sort of Ukrainian propaganda saying it's like 20,000 Russian troops, which is completely incorrect, because the withdrawal really started on the 18th of October by the Russian command, and so majority of the troops were withdrawn at this point. In terms of assessment, this is an absolutely correct move by the Russian command. Again, which kind of tells us that they are, pretty intelligent, despite of the other failures. But at the higher level, at the command level, there's a clear sort of thinking and very realistic assessment of the situation. They held for as long as they could, and once they could not anymore, they left, and they left in, I would say, pretty organized fashion, given that there is a lot of problems at lower level in the Russian army. In middle level, like basically there's a lot of rot. I mentioned this many times before. It's a Soviet army with all of its problems. And for example, example of these problems is you can see like abandoned Russian equipment, which was for whatever, something is broken, like run out of fuel, and what happens is Russian troops, they don't destroy that equipment; they just leave it behind, essentially intact, for Ukrainian troops to pick up. And the reason why they do that, because if they burn it, they would have personal responsibility. And I don't know to what extent, if they can be sort of sentenced to jail or something like that, but there is personal responsibility for that. So essentially, they are completely incentivized in the wrong way and disempowered. And that's kind of like a key feature of the Soviet army, or the Soviet system as a whole, is just complete disempowerment of individual. Something similar, to be fair, is happening in Ukrainian army because it's largely against Soviet army. Not really huge a difference. It just has more modern equipment at this point relative to the Russian army. But in essence, they are both twins. Not much of a difference. Um, so as I said, this is going back to all of this is that Russian command made correct and a timely move, and withdrawal probably started on October 18th, and it actually kind of tells us that um, either it was done completely sort of in discrete way, or the other sort of interpretation of the situation is Ukrainian command saw it, but did not want to sort of push or put pressure. And then we can always speculate why this is happening. There's obviously speculation that there is backdoor agreement. You never know, but we can have even find more simpler assumption. Our explanation is all of these attacks by Ukrainian troops lead to extremely heavy losses on human side, and uh, they're just simply you want to minimize that, but because Ukrainian troops don't know how to attack in a proper way. So it's probably also very logical sort of decision on Ukrainian command side. Okay, let's just let them leave and we save lives of the soldiers, and then we'll kind of like go from there and see what happens next. uh, you know Probably also rational decision given the sort of state of the affairs of Ukrainian troops. Um, but it obviously also means lost opportunities. If troops were much more sort of prepared and skilled, all of this 30 to 40,000 Russian troops could be encircled uh, on this bridgehead and essentially destroyed, which would open up really opportunities uh, in other sides of Ukraine and speed up liberation of the captured territories. But as they say, pigs don't fly, so it's better to be realistic than try to do something that you cannot do. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow. Bye bye.